July 15th, 2026. Atlanta, Georgia. World Cup semifinal. England are 10 minutes from the final. They've led since the 55th minute, and then Argentina does what Argentina always does, an equalizer from outside the box. And deep into stoppage time, one last attack, a header at the far post, and it's over. But this fixture, England versus Argentina, is not a normal rivalry. It's not the only one in the World Cup where the match carries the memory of a war, a real war, fought over a place most people can't find on a map. And to understand why, you have to leave the stadium behind and travel 8,000 miles south and 44 years back in time. These are the Falkland Islands, a cluster of windswept rocks in the South Atlantic, closer to Antarctica than to London, about 480 kilometers off the coast of Argentina and 12,000 kilometers from Britain, home in 1982 to around 1,800 people and 400,000 sheep. The sheep were winning. Britain took control of the islands in 1833 and never let go. Argentina, which calls them Las Malvinas, never stopped claiming them for 150 years. This stayed a diplomatic argument. Letters, speeches, resolutions at the United Nations. Nobody died over the Falklands. Nobody expected anyone ever would. Then came 1982, and Argentina was falling apart. The country was run by a military junta, generals who had taken power by force and held it through fear. The economy was collapsing, inflation was out of control, people were in the streets, and General Leopoldo Galtieri, the man at the top, needed something to anything to make the country love him. He picked the Malvinas. The bet was simple: seize the islands, spark a wave of patriotism, and save the regime. And critically, Galtieri was convinced Britain wouldn't fight back. The islands were tiny, far away, and expensive to defend. Surely London would complain, negotiate, and quietly move on. On April 2nd, 1982, Argentine forces landed and took the islands in a single day. In Buenos Aires, the plan worked instantly. The same streets that had been full of protesters earlier were now full of celebrations, though Galti stood on the balcony of the presidential palace in front of a roaring crowd. The second half of his bet, that Britain would stay home, survived exactly 3 days. Britain's Prime Minister was Margaret Thatcher, deeply unpopular, presiding over her own economic crisis and facing the humiliation of losing British territory to an invasion. She didn't negotiate. Within days, she sent a naval task force, over 100 ships, sailing 8,000 miles, one of the longest-range military campaigns ever attempted. Britain even requisitioned cruise liners to carry troops. On May 2nd, the British submarine Conqueror torpedoed the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano. 323 men died, the deadliest single moment of the war and the most controversial, because the Belgrano was outside Britain's declared exclusion zone when she sank. 2 days later, Argentina answered. A French-built Exocet missile skimmed meters above the waves and destroyed the British destroyer HMS Sheffield. This was now a real war. And here's the part almost nobody knows. Britain came very close to losing it. On May 21st, British troops landed at San Carlos Bay, a stretch of water pilots would nickname Bomb Alley. Argentine jets attacked the fleet again and again, flying so low they threaded between the ship's masts. Bomb after bomb slammed into British hulls and didn't explode. The pilots were flying too low. Their bombs never had time to arm before impact. If those fuses had worked, Britain could have lost half its landing fleet in a single week, and possibly the entire war. History turned on a few seconds of falling time. On land, the fight was crueler still. Many of Argentina's soldiers weren't professionals. They were conscripts, teenagers, some with only weeks of training sent into a sub-Antarctic winter with summer equipment, dug into frozen hills, and ordered to hold them against some of the best trained infantry on Earth. Around their positions, they laid thousands upon thousands of landmines. Remember those mines? They'll matter later. Through mid-June, British forces fought brutal night battles across the mountains surrounding the capital, Stanley, Mount Longdon, Tumbledown, close quarters fighting, sometimes down to bayonets, in freezing darkness. On June 14, 1982, the Argentine garrison in Stanley surrendered. The war had lasted 74 days. The cost, 649 Argentine dead, 255 British, and 3 islanders, the very people both sides claim to be fighting for. Now here's where the story flips. Ask yourself, who actually won this war? Britain won on the battlefield, obviously. Thatcher, unpopular before the war, became a national hero and won re-election the following year in a landslide. The victory reshaped British politics for a decade. But in Argentina, defeat did something extraordinary. The humiliation destroyed the junta. Galtieri was forced out within days of the surrender. The general's authority, built entirely on strength, collapsed the moment that strength was exposed as a line. Within 18 months, Argentina held democratic elections. The dictatorship that had kidnapped and disappeared thousands of its own citizens was finished. Sit with that for a second. The regime started a war to save itself. Losing that war freed the country. Argentine democracy has held ever since, and some historians put it bluntly, the general's worst defeat was Argentina's greatest escape. But wars don't end when the shooting stops. They go looking for somewhere else to live, and this one found the football pitch. Mexico City, June 22nd, 1986. World Cup quarterfinal. England versus Argentina. The first time the two nations met on a football pitch since the war, just 4 years after Stanley. For millions of Argentines, this was not just a match. 51 minutes in, Argentina's captain rose with England's goalkeeper and punched the ball into the net with his fist. The referee saw nothing. Goal. The scorer would famously say it was scored partly by the hand of God. 4 minutes later, the same player collected the ball inside his own half, beat 5 England players in one impossible run, and scored what is still voted the greatest World Cup goal of all time. 2 goals, 4 minutes apart, one an act of pure deception, the other pure genius. Argentina won 2-1, went on to win the whole tournament, and years later, that same captain connected the match directly to the Malvinas, describing it as a kind of national revenge, taken with a football instead of weapons. The rivalry never cooled after that. 1998, England lost to Argentina on penalties after having a player sent off in a flashpoint that dominated the headlines. 2002, England got their redemption, beating Argentina with a single penalty in Japan. Every single meeting carried the same double weight: sport on the surface, history underneath. And while the rivalry burned on, the islands themselves quietly moved forward. In 2013, the islanders held a referendum on remaining British. The result? 99.8% voted yes. Out of the entire voting population, 3 people said no. 3. The minefields from 1982 stayed fenced off for decades and became one of history's strangest accidents. Penguins, it turns out, are too light to trigger an anti-personnel mine. So for nearly 40 years, the most dangerous beaches in the South Atlantic became untouchable penguin sanctuaries. Humans kept out, penguins thriving. The last mines were finally cleared in 2020. Islanders celebrated by walking onto beaches that had been sealed since the war. The penguins, of course, stayed. Which brings the timeline all the way back to a stadium in Atlanta on July 15th, 2026. The late equalizer, the header, 2-1, Argentina tuna, ending England's World Cup. No shots have been fired since 1982. Argentina's constitution still claims the islands. Britain still governs them,